Who's going to have to wear a mask and when? What will the lines and the rides be like? How is Disney going to keep everything clean? And will I even be able to get into a park on any given day? Big questions. Let's see if we can figure out some answers. Now, there's a lot of things that we know. There's a lot of things we probably know, but then there's a lot of things we just don't know. So let's dive into that kind of category by category. The first thing that's pretty obvious is that no matter where you go, the hotels, the restaurants, the parks, masks are going to be required. This is obvious. So one of the questions we don't know though is, what is going to be the age requirement? I don't know about you, but my toddler, who's about 2.5, probably wouldn't wear a mask. And there's nothing I can do about that and nothing I can do to explain it to her. So I think we've seen in other places that 3 years old is typically the age cutoff for masks, but will they make exceptions? If you have kids that are in like the 2 to 3 to 4 range who might not want to wear a mask, that is a big question that you should consider before booking a trip at this point. What if they have to wear a mask? Would your kid be able to do that? And if not, then you might want to wait until masks are not required. Temperature checks, another thing that's pretty obvious. They're definitely going to do this at the entrance. We've already seen that at Disney Springs. But are they going to do this in other places? Are they going to do this sporadically through the day? I can see cast members potentially walking around the parks and doing random temperature screenings to guests. Now, on the one hand, it is a little bit annoying and invasive. It kind of takes you out of the magic. On the other hand, Disneyland and Disney World and Disney parks are so crowded that they might have to take extra special precautions like that to make sure that people weren't okay when they entered, but then not okay once they get in. In terms of general sanitation, we've already seen at Disney Springs that they've been propping up the trash can lids. That's super smart because think about it. When you use the trash, you have to push the lid, and that means a lot of people are touching it. So it's easier to just keep them propped open. But one of the biggest questions I have is actually about bathrooms. Think about all the things you touch in a bathroom, even the toilet paper or the seats. Are they going to clean every stall after every usage? Are they going to clean the flush handles on urinals after every usage? How exactly are they going to properly sanitize the bathrooms? This is going to be super interesting to see. Social distancing is obviously something that's going to take place as well. We've already seen this at Disney Springs with like the mats on the floor and even at Shanghai Disneyland. So let's cover a couple things at Disney parks where social distancing is going to be required but might be a little more complicated. The first thing that comes to mind is the hotels. I think it's pretty safe to say they'll limit capacity of the hotels, but by how much? 25%? 50%? But one of the questions for me is actually mousekeeping. Is Disney going to offer incentives for mousekeeping to come less so that they can limit the exposure to their staff? Or are they going to try and get mousekeeping in there even more to keep things extra clean and tidy? I don't know. This is an interesting question. However, if they are using mousekeeping, don't forget to tip them every day. Their job will be extra hard during all this. They certainly deserve it, so please tip as generously as you can. Next, what about transportation? They've got the monorail, they've got the buses, they've got minivans, they've got boats. How are they going to social distance on these things? Now, the first thing that comes to mind is you just limit capacity. Okay, fine. For things like the monorail and the boats, that might not be like the biggest deal, and minivans are probably just families or single parties anyway. But what about the buses? The thing with the buses is that it already can take forever to get a bus. And if you have the capacity, are you going to have twice as many buses running? I don't know. Every extra bus they run costs money. So at the end of the day, Disney is going to have to do some cost calculations on what they think is reasonable. Now, I, for one, already dislike some of the waits for the bus times when I stay on property. So if you're staying at a resort that traditionally has longer bus times or lots of stops like Caribbean Beach, then you might want to seriously consider about whether you're cool waiting in these extra lines. Now, thankfully, some of these resorts do have the Disney Skyliner now, and assuming that's open as well, maybe that'll cut back on some of the bus traffic. Okay, table service dining. I think the obvious thing is once again, they'll limit capacity. They probably won't use paper menus. They'll probably make you pull up the menu on your smartphone. So some of the questions I have is, will they enable mobile ordering for some of the table service restaurants? That would limit your interaction with the staff such that they'd basically just be coming by with your food and beverages and maybe to check up on you. Now, as they're spacing these restaurants out, are they just going to have empty tables to help enforce the social distancing? Are they just going to have tables farther spread apart? Now, if they leave some of the tables there, I'm curious. Do you think they'll do something Disney-like? Will they put Disney mannequins that are all dressed up in some of the empty tables or something like that? I don't know. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I think that'd be kind of cool. And then the other thing for dining is character meals. How are they going to pull that off? I mean, you've got kids running up and hugging characters over and over and over again, so that probably can't happen. We know the buffets already can't happen, so what about the characters? Maybe they'll just walk around and take pictures kind of close together, but not super close? Will they enforce no touching? I don't know. But if one of the big draws for you is character dining, this is something you want to think about. Or at the very least, wait until we have answers to make your reservation. Another interesting thing about the food, I keep hearing that there's potentially going to be disruptions to the supply chain for things like food and merchandise. Let's take beef as an example. If that happened and there was suddenly no beef, that would mean that restaurants like Le Cellier would have a much smaller menu. Now this could happen to poultry or meat or beer or whatever. It really depends on how well the supply chain holds up. But you should be prepared for the fact that there might be items that you love that just won't be available during your trip if you go sooner rather than later. Now that'd be a big bummer for me because I'm a major foodie. I love to eat, but it might be one of those sacrifices you have to make to get some Disney magic sooner rather than later. For ride queues, I think it's pretty obvious that they're just going to have the markers on the ground and they're going to make sure that people are spaced 6 feet apart. And we already know that parks will probably be limited to something like 25 or 50% capacity. But for the ride queues, if you make people stand 6 feet apart, that extends the queue quite a bit. So it's not like these queues have unlimited space. If you have enough people in a queue and you have to stand 6 feet apart, that means you're going to be wrapping and winding outside of where the queue was supposed to be. And I imagine that Disney does not want queues wrapped all around and in and about and intertangled in like the walking areas and other places. So my question is, will they have some kind of hard stop for ride queues where they basically say, from this point forward, we can't take any new guests? For example, you know sometimes they have the cast member holding the sign that says the line starts here? Well, when the parks reopen, they might replace that sign with line ends here, meaning basically no one else can enter if it's full up to this point. That would help keep walkways clear and help enforce social distancing, but it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the actual queue itself. Also related to ride queues are Fast Pass. Are there some rides that are just going to go Fast Pass only? I don't know, but I could see it where maybe they just don't have the space or the room to a standby queue when you're distancing people 6 feet apart. Another interesting thing is boarding passes. They introduced this for Rise of the Resistance, and it was pretty successful. Maybe they would apply the boarding pass feature to some e-tickets and fast passes for other rides and e-tickets in such a way that Disney is able to maximize digital queuing. It's also not unheard of to have virtual queues. They have that at Universal's Volcano Bay. So maybe Disney will unveil something like that as this goes on. I don't know. But again, all good questions to ask. The reason being, if all these queues are basically impacted, that will actually limit the number of rides you can go on. So if the rides are by far your favorite part of a Disney trip, then you might want to consider waiting until things are back to normal. And that's just the ride queue part. What about the rides themselves? They will also have to find ways to social distance the rides as well. So for some rides, it's kind of easy. For example, they just let one family in on any given car vehicle. For things like roller coasters where it's 2 or 4, that's really not a big deal, probably not going to impact capacity too much. But what about things for Tower of Terror? Will they just rope off every other row or every other seat? I don't know. But these are all things to consider because now you have queues where you have to space out 6 feet, which means they might have a hard cap at the end, and you have limited ride vehicle capacity. So the reason this worries me a bit is it means that you'll have slower ride throughput. And you've already got lines that have people moving slower. So at the end of the day, you might be waiting kind of a long time to do only a few rides on any given day. So again, all things to keep in mind when you're planning your next Disney trip and when you're prepared to go back. The other thing that strikes me as potentially interesting about the rides is that rides move. So even if you socially distance people, if I'm at the front of Thunder Mountain and I cough and the ride's moving, doesn't that kind of expose everyone behind me? Or Tower of Terror where you're going up and down, up and down. At the end of the day, germs do float and stay in the air. So even with social distancing, how much of a difference is it actually going to make, given that these germ particles can technically spread across the air? Now, honestly, the biggest thing on my mind, though, is actually park capacity. Now, on the surface, when you hear that they're going to lower capacity to like 25 or 50%, that's awesome. It's like slow season, even in the summer. But when you start thinking about it, what you have to ask yourself is, how do I know if I'll actually get in any given park on any given day? And this is where I'm really waiting for the details from Disney. How are they going to enforce park access? Is it going to be first come, first serve, and when they hit capacity, that's it? That's going to be kind of cumbersome. Are they going to implement some kind of reservation system? That would be better, but there are a lot of variables to consider in terms of who would have access to those reservations. Would they consider things like whether you're staying at a Disney hotel or off-site or at a partner hotel? Would they consider if you're an annual pass holder versus a Florida resident or a California resident or out of state or out of country? Would they consider things like same-day dining reservations? Would they have reservations for the morning and the evening so you could park hop? These are all questions that ultimately I'm sure Disney will answer, but these are the questions that are top of my mind as I decide whether or not I want to be one of the first to get back into Disney parks, or if I want to kind of sit back and wait until things get closer to normal. So honestly, to summarize, I feel like there are some things we obviously know. Masks, social distancing, temperature checks, reduced capacity. But with all those things we know, there are so many open questions that Disney will have to answer for us. And I think these questions are really important for everyone to consider. I know personally, I am dying to get back to a Disney park. I would be willing to put up with a lot of nuance for the sake of getting my fill of Disney magic. But everyone else is different, so it's really up to everyone to ask themselves all of these questions and figure out what's right for you. And with that, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like or subscribe or do both. If you have your own thoughts, comments, predictions, suggestions, please leave them in the comments. I will reply back to you, I promise. And with that, thank you again. I'll see you in the next video.